Good morning, everyone. My name is David Kuros. I'm the branch chief over mobile source emissions inventory work here at CARB. Thank you for joining the public workshop on the statewide aircraft emissions inventory model. We have a morning of material presented that we're going to be presenting for you today. And to get us started, we have with us Dr. Michael Benjamin, the chief of the Air Quality Planning and Science Division, who is going to say a few words.
Good morning. My name is Michael Benjamin, and I'm Chief of the Air Quality Planning and Science Division at the California Air Resources Board, or CARB. As David said, I oversee air quality planning efforts at CARB, including development of emissions inventories, such as the aircraft inventory that we'll be discussing today. Emissions inventories are fundamental to the development of regulations and policymaking at CARB. So we invest significant effort in ensuring that we have the most up-to-date and accurate emissions inventories for all mobile source categories, including the aviation sector. The purpose of today's workshop is to share with you our proposed new statewide aircraft emissions inventory model and to hear your feedback and solicit your input. We've developed this inventory in close collaboration with the local air districts in California and industry stakeholders such as the California Airport Council. We began developing the statewide aircraft inventory in 2021, and the draft version of the model we're discussing today will be modified based on feedback that we received from you today and in a 30-day comment period following this workshop. We will be finalizing the model early next year so that the model output can be used in development of California and district air quality plans needed to meet the new federal fine particulate or PM2.5 standard. CARB is also just beginning rule development for zero emissions ground operations at California airports. We'll be holding a public workshop kicking off that rulemaking probably next year. The inventory model that we're discussing today will inform our zero emissions ground operations rulemaking and may be modified based on information collected during the rulemaking process. So in closing, I'd like to thank you again for taking the time to participate in today's workshop. I appreciate our ongoing partnership with many of you, especially at the air districts, and I look forward to hearing your comments and questions today. So I'll now turn it back to my colleague, David Kuros, to start the main part of today's workshop. David?
Thank you, Michael. Next slide, please. So you're all on the Zoom call, but here's some instructions on the workshop in case you do desire to join by telephone. There's a call-in number and an access code. The slides that we're presenting today are posted on our website at the link that's shown. Documentation is also on our website. It's not linked at the exact URL that's shown on the screen, and we'll make sure it's there shortly after the workshop today. The workshop is being recorded and will also be posted online after the event. We're going to be pausing for questions at 2 points during the workshop, so we ask that you hold your questions until those times, and we'll have instructions on how you can ask questions when we get there shortly. Next slide. Here's an outline of the workshop that we have planned for you this morning. We're first going to start with a background on aircraft and past inventories for the aircraft sector. Next slide. How are inventories used? How are emissions inventories used? Well, the first thing is that they support our air quality models for the estimation of regional pollutant concentrations. Air quality modeling and emissions inventory is a critical part of our state implementation plan process that we use to meet our federal air quality standards here in California and a lot of our other air quality goals. We also use inventories to identify the need for emission control programs, whether they're regulatory or more incentive-based. Next slide. So CARB has a number of mobile source emissions inventories that we develop. We have the MFAC model for on-road emissions, and then we have 15 sector-specific off-road models. Aircraft to date is not one of those models that we maintain at the statewide level. Rather, the inventories are developed by the local air districts and they're submitted to CARB as either point or area sources. We find that some air districts perform regular updates, have great data sources, and have what we think a lot of good accuracy for the region. Other air districts may not use the latest data. They may be relying upon older tools that the FAA puts out, like EDMS, which is a model that at one point was a good standard for estimating aircraft emissions, but is no longer the best available model in our understanding. And some other districts for some categories used emissions factors that harmonize with US EPA, but haven't been updated in some time, sometimes in a decade or two. And so that has identified the need for us at the state level for the California Air Resources Board to develop a tool that would be able to estimate emissions from aircraft at a statewide level. And so we think that that's going to be a good start to helping with mitigate and address some of the district inconsistencies and also some missing categories of aircraft emissions. Identifying the proper amount of aircraft emissions is important because aircraft is one of the few mobile source categories that both has an increase in projection of activity and does not have emission control standards on the horizon that are going to offset that growth. And therefore, total emissions from the aircraft sector, particularly from commercial aviation, are projected to increase over the coming decades. And as indicated on the slide, aircraft will be over 10% of mobile source NOx emissions in 2037. Next slide. Today, we're having a public workshop to talk about the development of something that we've been working on for a few years, the California Aircraft Emissions Inventory Model. We're calling it CAI2024. And what this will do is it'll serve as a framework that we can have. It'll be a tool that's available to use as a default value in our state implementation plan or SIP and other policy work. And we're going to go over the next steps at the end of the presentation where we have a pathway for air districts to still perform their own analyses that will complement what we're doing at the state level. This effort, and we're going to get into a lot of the details on the methodology shortly, is going to ensure that all aviation activities and their emissions are captured statewide. So, for example, a lot of air districts have general aviation activity assessed and included in their models, but not for all the aviation facilities within the regions. Also, rotorcraft, or more commonly known as helicopters, to our knowledge, are not included in many, if any, of the air district models to date. And those are important because they mostly use leaded aviation gasoline, which not only results in criteria pollutant emissions like NOx and ROG, but lead emissions, which is it's a criteria pollutant and also a local air toxic. Next slide. This slide shows the four major categories that are included in our model and some of the subcategories within. The commercial air carriers and air taxis are primarily fueled by jet fuel, and some of the other categories like general aviation have more of the aviation gasoline piston-fired engine configurations. And then there's other categories that have various combinations of those two technologies. One thing I wanted to emphasize is that within our commercial category and our general aviation category, there may be an overlap between what we define as an air taxi versus an air carrier or something that's a general aviation aircraft. So for the purposes of this model, we define aircraft that have a seating capacity of 6 or fewer as general aviation, and then aircraft that have a seating capacity of 7 to 60 as air taxi. which would be in the commercial category. Next slide. And this slide shows some pictures of the categories that were just mentioned, everything from an air carrier to helicopters to military aircraft. One of the considerations of performing an aircraft inventory that we don't have with the other mobile source models is the vertical allocation of the emissions. And so there's something called a landing takeoff cycle, or LTO cycle, which starts with an aircraft descending below what we call the mixing height until it's landing, until it takes back off and ascends back to that mixing height, which varies from airport to airport. Above that mixing height, the emissions don't readily impact ground level air quality. And so for the purposes of air quality planning, we do not include those emissions. From an air quality modeling standpoint, we do, but for the purpose of this presentation today, we're only thinking about the emissions that are on the ground up to the mixing height, which is generally around 3,000 feet. Federal SIP conformity rules specify that a value of 3,000 feet can be used in the absence of region-specific analysis. And we today will go over the analysis that we've done and have identified a mixing height value for every aviation facility in California. And so that brings us to the next part of the presentation, and Walter Wong on our team will pick the presentation up from here. Over to you, Walter.
All right, thank you, David. My name is Walter Wong, and I work under David under Mobile Source Analysis Branch. And I'll be going over the methodology for CAI 2024. Next slide. I just wanted to say before I went into the methodology that there's many different parts and it can be very detailed. So for further clarification, there is a draft inventory documentation posted on our website that will detail all the steps. So this is the methodology overview for estimating aircraft emissions that includes these steps. Activities for all airports within the state, along with the fleet mix, which is the airframe and engine models that arrive and depart at each airport. And we also estimate the mixing height at each airport. And then we do emissions calculation consisting of inputting the fleet mix for each airport to generate emission factors. With the 2022 baseline emission calculated, we then forecast fleet growth for future years. Next slide. For activity, we use several sources. First is the Terminal Area Forecast, or TAF, produced yearly by FAA. TAF includes 191 California airports, including all of the major airports. And we consider this the accurate reference value when comparing with other data sources. The drawback of TAF is that it does not provide fleet mix, which is the engine airframe combination, but just total activity by major categories such as air carrier, air taxi, and general aviation. FlightAware. We evaluated several vendors in order to obtain more detailed information. We ended up purchasing data from FlightAware, a private company that uses air traffic control data and other sources. And that produced data for 857 aviation facilities, which includes both airports and heliports. The one big benefit to FlightAware data was the detailed mix, fleet mix. We compared the FlightAware total operation against TAF total operations data, and the results were similar for the commercial category operations, which consisted of air carrier and air taxi. But FlightAware underreported flights in the general aviation category. Next. Since FlightAware general aviation numbers were significantly lower than what was reported in TAF, we looked at other data sources to fill in the data gap for general aviation. We used the website fltplan.com run by Garmin, which aggregates data from smaller general aviation airport. And we found an additional source of 60 additional aviation airport data. So we use that to scale up the data for general aviation. Next. Here's the summary of our data source for activity. For commercial aircraft, TAF and flight-aware data sets were used. For general aviation, the underreported flight-aware general aviation operations were scaled up to match the data from TAF and FLT plan. Here's an example of the scaled-up number from flight-aware. The top part shows the original flight-aware operations and the resulting TAF operations. And the bottom part shows flight-aware operation versus FLT aggregated data. Next. For military operation, this was done differently than for commercial and general aviation category. Since TAF and FlightAware do not provide detailed data about military flights, we found reports from the Department of Defense that put out the AICU reports for certain air bases. These reports are generally done for compatibility use surrounding the air bases, mostly pertaining to noise and flight path. In the reports, the operations of military aircraft by model types are listed. The drawback of these reports is that the frequency varies as to when they're published or gets updated. Some examples of these air bases are listed here. Like for Travis, the newest report is 2009, but some air bases like Beale and Miramar is like 20 and 2021. So. On the fleet mix, as I mentioned earlier, we use the detailed airframe engine operations provided by FlightAware dataset that includes data for commercial, general aviation, and rotorcraft. For military fleet mix operation, we obtained from the AIC reports and combined that with data obtained from the 2021 Air Emissions Guide for Air Force Mobile Sources. This guide provided all the military aircraft types with detailed airframe engine emissions data compiled together from engine tests done on military aircraft. Next, mixing height. In developing the inventory, a consistent approach was necessary to apply an appropriate mixing height. The federal SIP conformity rules specify emissions up to 3,000 feet can be considered as default in absence of region-specific analysis. The 3,000 feet value is used as a default value for the EPA standard LTO. Another method could be like a mean value, such as mean annual morning or something. Whatever method is chosen, mixing height should be determined in conjunction with those responsible for the air quality modeling of the region to ensure that assumptions used for creating different sections of the overall inventory are consistent. So some air districts in the reporting use the 3,000 default, while other air district reported specific numbers for their district airport. So the mixing height methodologies varied across the state. In consultation with our state atmospheric modeling group and SIP groups, they provided the planetary boundary layer data set called ERA5 to use as a surrogate for mixing height. We used the 95th percentile of the highest average hour and month over the course of a year. This approach ensures that we are not underestimating emissions that are mostly substantially impacting ground level air pollution levels during most meteorological conditions throughout the year. Here's an example of the different mixing height in Southern California for Ontario Airport and LAX. For Ontario, since it's an inland airport, May has the highest month for mixing height, and December is lowest, mostly due to temperature. For LAX, since it's by the coast, the mixing height variation is dependent not only on temperature, but probably also wind and other conditions. For LAX, the highest mixing height happens in March. Here are a few more examples for mixing height for Oakland and SFO. Go to next chart. In calculating the emissions inventory, we need to obtain emission factors. These are the sources we use. For commercial, general aviation, and rotorcraft, we use the FAA's Aviation Environmental Design Tool, or AEDT. This version we use as 3E. The latest version is 3F, but the emission difference should be very minor between the two versions. And for the data source for military aircraft, we use the 2021 Air Force Guide. And as a note, we did not use US EPA's emission factor for any of the categories. Next, before we get into the emissions calculation methodology, this slide shows visually the emission breakdown by flight mode. In this example for NOx for a 767 Boeing 300, the flight mode is broken down by departure and arrival. Most of the NOx emissions come from the departure portion, specifically the takeoff and climb portion where the aircraft is burning fuel at higher temperature. For ROG, most of the emissions come during the taxi portion and less at the takeoff and climb stage. We have developed a new programming tool called CAI2024, and Kishan will demonstrate the software later in the presentation. So the CAI2024 contains 3 modules that calculate emissions for non-military flights. And then the second module we have is for agriculture, and the third module is for military aircraft. So this, for the non-military module, we incorporate the AEDT emission factors output with the operations data for each airport in the state. It then accounts for airport-specific adjustments for mixing height, taxi times, and APU runtime. Here's a graphical view of the calculation process. All the fleet mix information from FlightAware is inputted into AEDT for all 857 airports, heliports, and we obtain AEDT's arrival and departure baseline emission factors. We run the AEDT with standard default values such as 3,000 feet mixing height, default taxi time for each specific airport, default APU time, and stage length 1. We then adjust the baseline emission factors for different stage length, airport-specific mixing height, and where applicable, airport-specific taxi times. Additionally, if the aircraft has an APU, the APU emission is added. With the baseline calendar year 2022 calculated, we forecast either with TAF growth rate or growth rate with local constraints provided by the air districts. Stage number. The stage number is as indicated in this chart for AEDT refers to the nautical miles that aircraft travels from the airport. If planes fly further, more fuel is needed. The weight of the fuel on the aircraft is correlated to the trip length. The higher the stage length, the more NOx is produced. ROG is not affected by stage length. Most air carriers travel intrastate as stage length 2. Most cross-country travel is stage length 2 to 5, and international is close to stage length 6 to 8. We use the stage length provided by South Coast AQMD's report for airports in the region. And for airports outside of the South Coast, we use the composite stage length of the aircraft and applied it to the other regions. In future updates, we will probably get more detailed data for trip length for aircraft across the state. We use the default taxi time for AEDT except for specific airport that South Coast AQMD provided. In this table, the taxi time shows for specific airport by calendar year. As you can see, LAX taxi times are increasing. Changing taxi time will affect ROG emissions and not NOx emission. For example, a 1 minute increase from 8 minutes to 9 minutes in taxi out time will increase ROG emission by 12% for the departure mode. The default APU time in AEDT is 13 minutes for both arrival and departure. APUs are only on air carriers and some air taxis. We revised the APU runtime based on research studies from UC Berkeley and some figures published by a company called OAG. We calculated the turnaround time and the time APU is running to be about 42 minutes. So adjustments were made to APU runtime for arrival from 13 minutes to 21 minutes. And for departure, the APU runtime is 21 minutes plus the time we assume the APU is on during the taxi out mode. Next. This is the forecast for the baseline 2022. TAP 2023 is used to forecast activity out to 2050 for commercial, general aviation, and military. TAP forecasts were overwritten where local airport data exists. South Coast AQ&T has specific airport fleet mix growth rates and were incorporated into the model. Likewise, San Diego and SFO also has specific growth projections. I haven't discussed the agriculture aircraft methodology yet, but for the forecast of agriculture use aircraft, the growth rate is declining and aligns with the 2021 aircraft agriculture equipment emissions inventory. This is the TAF growth rate by categories. Most of the categories are flat except for the air carriers, which is growing consistently. The agriculture use aircraft methodology is a little different than the other non-military aircraft inventory. We'll use the methodology as outlined in San Joaquin Valley's APCD documentation based on acreage sprayed. The Department of Pesticide Regulation publishes yearly data for aerial acreage sprayed by county. We then convert the acres sprayed by applying the acres per hour sprayed by aircrafts and helicopters. Aircraft spray more acres per hour than helicopters. Next, we convert the hours to gallons by applying the fuel consumptions of the aircraft and helicopters. Finally, we apply the AEDT emission factors. Okay.
Well, thank you, Walter. So we presented a lot of material. Now we want to hear from everyone. So we're going to pause for questions. The way we're going to do this today is this is just a standard meeting. So you all have full control to unmute yourselves and start talking. We ask that if you have a question, rather than putting anything in the chat, if you don't mind, just raise your hand and we can call on you. And I will track who has their hand up and hopefully keep everyone in order so that the first hand raised is the first person that gets called on. When we do call on you, we fully encourage you to turn your camera on if you're comfortable with that. But we do ask, just at a minimum, you state your name and your affiliation, and then use slide numbers if possible if you have a question on a particular slide, and we'll navigate to that slide when you ask your question or when we're responding to it. So I see a couple hands raised. So the first person is Michael Huber. So Michael, go ahead.
Good morning. Can you guys see and hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. No, thank you. No, this is good. You know, I'm Mike Huber from the Navy, representing the U.S. Department of Defense, and it looks like some of the stuff you're doing is definitely going to make it more accurate. Although we do have, and we've been working like for the last 20 years with the air districts, surrounding our bases. We have very specific data as far as at every engine setting, every engine type. The ACUs is not the most accurate data set. So I just wanted to confirm that we could, continue to work with the air districts. Obviously, maybe the mixing height data, if you have better mixing height data, that could help on a per airport basis. But I just wanted to make sure that we could continue to do that, because I think this is definitely more accurate than the default values we've seen in the past. But, we have specific data to every engine setting on every aircraft type. And we've worked with our districts for years on that.
Okay, thank you. We tried to contact some of the military installations, but we didn't really.
Okay, what I'm going to do then, points of contact. I'm going to give you my point of contact information. I'll take on the point as far as coordinating with the Department of Defense. I can get you to any base. But also, we have central data. And I saw this circulate through DoD circles. So, I think we can work with you to refine the estimates and make sure that you have the best data possible.
Thank you, because when we show the results, we'll see that our military area has the biggest uncertainty, so that would really help.
Yeah, and ACRUS is sort of, for the purposes those things were developed, I mean, it's kind of a worst case thing too, but we do have very accurate data, which we're held to under our environmental documents, as far as, how many, movements we have as far as, on an aircraft type. So the data is pretty tight. So yeah, I'll type my info in the chat, but definitely I'll email the points of contact on the last slide too.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, thank you. Okay, the next person that has their hand up is Mark Carreras Ospedra. Mark, over to you.
Hi, David. Thanks so much for putting this, and thanks also for accommodating all the comments that we've had over the weeks and months prior to this. We discussed this before, but regarding the 95th percentile for the mixing height, I mean, your argument is that we don't want to underrepresent mixing like the total emissions, but I wonder if like 95th percentile is like we're basically assuming almost like the upper bound, because there's going to be many days that are going to be below that. So that's just one comment that I have. But I mean, I agree that with 95 percentile, we're going to add more emissions. But perhaps, yeah, that's kind of more like an upper bound rather than kind of an average. And the other one, we may have discussed this, but so your operation of AEDT is that you operate AEDT under certain standard inputs, and then you apply these off-model adjustments after that for each individual airport. Did you guys do any particular? I guess you did. Did you analyze like how did you validate that with like, okay, if we do model one specific airport with the airport specific inputs, and you apply this adjustment, how that differs in terms of the emissions?
We did look at we chose most of the bigger ones like Burbank PX to try to come up with some of the adjustments. So, and we didn't see that much of a difference. So I think because if we have to go back and run it for every, change all the different parameters for every individual airport, it was going to be a lot of more work, because we just wanted to start a framework and then try to find corrections for those. But it is possible that you could go and input in your own for all the different airports, but we think that the variation will be small. So, but we chose LAX as the main model.
All right. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, for your comments. And we have done thorough evaluation of all the off-model corrections to make sure that the final outputs that we're scaling from AEDT are reasonably or virtually just as accurate as if we had done all the work within the AEDT framework. I also wanted to respond to your mixing height question. And we had extensive conversations with our SIP group and also our modeling group here within the Air Quality Planning and Science Division at CARB. And I know that you and Sang-Lee Lee at the district have inquired about this when we met with you individually, and we've shared the raw data from the ERA 5 reanalysis with you. And we've come up with a 95th percentile, and we haven't shown the results of the whole inventory yet, but we're pretty close to where your estimates were in the past, even though we differ on mixing height, just because the new version of the AEDT model has slightly different outputs and our activity is slightly different in some areas. So I don't think it's going to make a big difference for the South Coast area, despite the mixing heights being different for some airports. We are open to further conversation with that, but if we do have further dialogue, we need to bring our modeling experts into the room. So we're happy to talk about that with you further if you have any insights after looking at the data that we sent.
All right. Thanks so much.
So I see another hand raised from Kyle Porter. So Kyle, go ahead if you have a question.
Yeah, good morning, David, and to everybody else. Just kind of more of a matter of clarification. I don't recall the slide, but it was pretty early on in the presentation. It had to do with the classification of aircraft into GA or air taxi. If I recall, the transition from GA to air taxi was above 6 seats. Having been in this industry quite a long time, I was just curious on how that designation came about. Arguably, general aviation is a very vast and broad term. 6-seat aircraft, it could be very small, but there are, some that seat more than that. Gulfstream, which is a very popular corporate aviation aircraft, is, would be classified as a GA, not as an air taxi. So I just was curious on how that came about, more as a question to lay a foundation for understanding on our part as to where that definitive line was drawn.
Yeah, we had a hard time too, trying to differentiate those, because between like 6, 10 seaters, we just based it on just to make it easier for us. But because when we input it into AEDT, it didn't matter like if it was a general aviation or air taxi. It just took the engine in the airframe, so it gave us the emission factor. I think we just try to group it into like air taxi and general aviation just as a label, but it wouldn't affect our emissions calculation, because the AEDT would take the engine and not, is it an air taxi or things like that. But yeah, we had trouble with trying to label some of those, because an air taxi is supposed to be like a scheduled thing, so we didn't have data on how to get to those. So to make it easier for us, we just, looked at the airframe and try to see, are they more used for like recreational purposes, or are they more like, they're going to transport people? So.
Okay, thank you.
Kyle, I may have missed it. Can you repeat what your recommendation was? Did you have a guidance on how you would have delineated the categories?
No, and again, the reason why I asked just for a clarification is because everybody kind of draws the line differently when you need to have a threshold of when you change categories. GA aircraft, again, is a very broad category. I mean, you can have Boeing 737s, that's a general aviation configured aircraft, and then you have airlines that are the same type of aircraft. So when I heard the indication of the 6-seat being the transition from GA to air taxi, that's what kind of just sparked my interest. But if the calculation is only dependent on the engine, not necessarily the classification, then that really was kind of the foundation of my question, trying to make sure that we're calculating something as a category that aircraft may be really something else. But if there's no differentiating the calculation, then that was just the purpose of my question, was for an understanding.
Yeah, because I looked at the FAA's, their designation, and I had a hard time differentiating some of those too. So even if it was the same plane, they would have different variation, like it could be air carrier or air taxi, even in the same model. So I had a hard time. So it was, yeah, it's just for labeling purpose. But if somebody does have a more definitive guide that will show us, like, okay, these are mostly air taxi, but we would take that, but we wouldn't know where to find the data source.
Okay, thank you.
Next question, Abhinav Guha.
Hi, everyone. And thanks, Walter, and the whole team for putting this together. This is a big effort, I know, because we have been ourselves working on updating our aviation sector emissions inventory, and especially the historical emissions portion of it. So my question is about this fuel loading and the stage correction or stage factor. I'm assuming that AEDT does take into account some level of stage as a default. Is that correct? And or is it the dead weight that these engine emission factors are based on? And in general, for commercial airports, do you see, based on whatever AEDT's default assumption is, do you see the correction as being a positive correction, as in terms of increasing the emissions further or lowering the emissions once that stage correction is made? That's kind of my first question. And the second point that I wanted to make was to Kyle's point about this categorization. We face the same challenge, and it would help if CARB, based on this work, defines these categories, what they call general aviation, what they call air taxis, and have strict definitions that other air districts can then adhere to and standardize and follow as well. Thank you.
Okay, the first question, AEDT doesn't have a default. You have to choose what you want. So we put in the default of 1, and then we had data from the South Coast AQ1D where they had their airport and they had a composite numbers for, so we used those for South Coast airports, and then we took the composite of the aircraft that they flew, and we try to apply it to the other regions, like in the SFO area, in the Bay Area. So there is no default. You have to choose it in the AEDT. But in the future, we will probably have a better idea because we'll be able to get the trip length for each of the aircraft that take off. So we'll be able to get the correct stage length for each of the airports.
Okay.
And the other question was?
It was more about the air taxi.
Oh, the labeling.
Yeah, thanks, Abhinav, for the comment about suggesting that CARB picks a definition that other air districts can choose to follow. That's helpful. And I know that you have worked with us over the past several months, but for others, could you state your affiliation? Okay, thanks, Abhinav. Next question, over to John Henkelman.
Hi, thanks. I want to kind of go back a little bit to Michael Huber's comments and one of the questions he had asked. So each time we go through an air quality management planning cycle and develop our inventory for that, we work with the naval base to develop that inventory for our military vessels. And I wanted to, I guess I just wanted to clarify whether that is still going to be allowed in the future, or whether that military section of the inventory is going to be taken over by CARB. Because we at Ventura County APCD, we work with the military on that. We want to keep control of that.
And thank you for the question. So is CARB going to be proposing to take over the military categories or everything that's non-military? We've had a lot of internal discussions, and we don't have a strong precedent for the other mobile source categories. What we've decided to do is find to use what we were able to obtain as the best available data, and we're going to be getting more data thanks to the comments that we've received so far. But we do plan on allowing the air districts to continue to perform their own inventories for military or any other category, provided that it's submitted a month in advance of the typical annual CEIDARS deadline, so that we can look it over and just reconcile it with what baseline or default values we've come up with, and that we can understand what might be driving the differences if there are any. But to circle back to your question and repeat the answer again, you will still have the ability to work with the military bases or other military operations within your jurisdiction and use those through your planning cycle.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, John. Next question, Catherine Van Osten.
Kathleen.
I'm sorry, Kathleen.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Kathleen Van Osten, I represent United Airlines here in California. I'm curious in terms of your fleet your fleet mix and how you will obtain that information. Is that already in the database, databases that you're using? Or how do you intend to account for fleet mixes?
Yes, as we pointed out, we bought data from FlightAware, which provided the fleet mix for most of the commercial and air taxi and general aviation and helicopters. So, and we have past data all the way to 2012, and we'll probably buy more in the future to get better data like trip length and stuff like that. But we do have data from FlightAware fleet mix. And in the future, like for 2031 and 2037, we took the fleet mix from the AQMDs that had it, like South Coast. They had a specific fleet mix in the future, so we incorporated that into the model. And SFO also had a different thing, so we incorporated that too. So.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Next person, Brian McDonald.
Yeah, hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for the time. Just a question, sorry, Affiliation Marathon Petroleum Corporation. Presentation started off, this seems like it's a SIP measure you noted, so for NOx, other pollutants. Are you guys anticipating that this would also update the greenhouse gas emission inventories, or is this purely a SIP related item?
Thanks for the question. So is this going to be for criteria pollutants that we use for the SIP, or is it going to affect the greenhouse gas emissions inventory? This is not a greenhouse gas emissions inventory model. I believe some of the CARB staff that work on that model may be on the line and they can further elaborate, but their effort would be separate from what's presented here. The big factor is that we are only looking at emissions during the LTO cycle, but emissions above that height, whereas they may not be as readily impacting ground level air quality, they are still affecting greenhouse gas emissions and the effect on the global climate. So a different approach would need to be taken for greenhouse gases.
David, maybe I can speak to that. This is Michael Benjamin at CARB. So we have a different group in our industrial strategies division at CARB that is responsible for developing the greenhouse gas inventory for all sectors, including aviation, and that information is used in the development of the scoping plan. So we are in close collaboration with them. We're working closely with them on that, but this model is not being used for development of greenhouse gas inventories for aviation. Like David said, there's a difference in sort of impacts of the different pollutants and sort of different approaches. In some ways, calculating the greenhouse gas inventory estimates from aviation is a little bit easier because it's based essentially on fuel used by the sector. And we're interested in the impacts at all sort of heights above the ground. And so the short answer is no, it's not in this model, the greenhouse gases, but we are working with our colleagues elsewhere at CARB. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I just wanted, it was a point of clarification for my own. So I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, next question, over to Todd Tamura.
Thanks. This is Todd Tamura. I'm a consultant, and I had two questions. The first question had to do with, does the model that you're planning that it's going to include evaporative emissions or just exhaust?
What's the question? Can you repeat that?
Yes. Is the model going to include evaporative emissions as well as exhaust, or just exhaust?
Just exhaust, no evap.
Okay. And then for the exhaust, for the PM emissions, it sounded like the presentation was pretty heavily based on activity data rather than emission factors. And it sounded like you were just going to use the FAA model emission factors. Is that right?
FAA as in AEDT's emission? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So for particulate, that model uses a first order approximation. And I don't know how much CARB has looked at it, but I was thinking it would be good to see if there are better data available than that.
And thanks, Todd, for the suggestion. Do you have any ideas or suggestions on other data sources that would be potentially more accurate for PM emissions?
Yeah, well, I think there's been some work done by some one of the Missouri, universities in Missouri. I can't remember if it was Washington University of St. Louis or U-Missouri. I think it was U-Missouri, maybe at Rolla. And they seem to have done some particulate testing from aircraft turbines.
So is it generally FAA's is lower than what you think?
You know, I actually haven't gone through a detailed analysis. I just know that the FAO, if you read about the first FOA, the first order approximation is, you know, very much a first order approximation, and it seems like there might be a better way to do it.
Thank you for that. We'll look into work done by those universities, and if you have anything specific, that's always helpful. With this model and other models, we continuously strive to use real-world emissions factors. And so in some instances, the best we have is certification data that might not fully represent what's going on once you put an engine in a piece of equipment or some other type of mobile source and operate it in the real world. And so
yeah, what they point out and what FAA points out, or I think maybe it's ICAO, is that they don't have certification standards for PM for aircraft. And so that's why they don't have as much data.
Yeah, point noted. Thank you.
Yeah, we noticed that the AEDT didn't have PM for helicopters, so we got it from the Swiss FOCA. So they had a whole compilation of PM for that. But yeah, we noticed that. So I didn't know. Thank you.
And if it helps, in full disclosure, some other processes that are not included in the model are the non-exhaust PM emissions. So for example, tire wear or brake wear during aircraft takeoff and landing. You're just not able to identify a conclusive enough data source that we could use to fold in. So we know that the PM emissions are likely underestimated for that reason. And that's something that we're continuously looking to improve for the other mobile source categories like on-road vehicles that are included in our MFAC model. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands raised. I'll pause for a minute, and if there are no further questions, we'll continue with the rest of the presentation.
Okay. Okay. Next slide. Yeah, I'll be going over the results and findings. Okay, the next few slides will go over the results and findings. The first 3 slides will show the general trend of emissions comparison between CPEM 2022 reporting and the new CAI 2024 results for calendar year 2022, 2031, and 2037. And then further on, a more detailed breakdown of the emissions by categories will be shown to help explain some of the differences. The general, the general trend is up in the future years, just like CPEM, it's growing. CI is also growing for NOx. For ROC, we are pretty flat, and CPEM is growing a little bit, but it's not as much. But we are lower than what CPEM is reporting. Same thing for PM. Next, these slides will show more detailed breakdown by category for calendar year 2031. So this slide shows for air carrier, the NOx is higher than what CPEM is showing. This can be seen, the military category is causing most of the difference because we are vastly under as compared to CPEM. Same thing for ROG. We are on the military, we are under counting or very different from CPAN. And same thing for PM. Next. Okay, next slide. So this is we looked at the trends in the future in the past slides in the 2031 detailed breakdown. Now we're going to focus on 2022. This is the baseline year. This slide is a comparison broken down by categories, by commercial, general aviation, agriculture, and military. And it's a numerical reference for comparison against CPAN. So the next slide will show a graphical view of this data. So as you can see, the blue part is the commercial, and the general aviation is the smaller, and the military is in the orange bar. So if you just look at the blue and the orange bar, we are not very different from CPAN. We're still lower, but if you account for military, which makes up a big difference, then we become much lower than CPAN. So as you can see, the PM for the difference between, we are way different. So that's why we have a lot of uncertainty in the military area. Next, these are the key findings by category. And commercial flights are slightly lower for NOx and ROG and similar for PM. And general aviation is lower than CPAN 2022 due to we using AEDT's emission factor instead of US EPA's emission factor. Because we think generally the districts were using the US EPA's general emission factor for general aviation. And additionally, the general aviation facilities do not increase emissions, but improve spatial resolutions of output. And the agriculture aircraft emissions are higher than previously in CPAN, but still it's very small, less than 1% of all aircraft emissions. And most importantly, the military aircraft is significantly lower than CPAN 2022. Some of the reasons for the difference are that CA 2022 military activity data source might be older. And also CPAN 2022 could also be out of date, as some air districts may not provide update on the military aircraft emissions. And lastly, we could also be missing startup emissions and the testing emissions for military aircraft. Most of those will probably be ROG and PM produced at the idle stage. And also CPAN 2022, we do not have documentation that air districts used in their adjustments to CPAN that accounted for a large jump in emissions. And that's it. And we will go on to the demonstration of the new statewide model for Fishan.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Walter. My name is Kai-San Zhang. I work for both David Cho and Dr. David Curious. Dr. Cho right now today cannot make it because he's due to some health issues. So I'm going to talk about the work we have done to develop a model. It's called CAI2024 to estimate the emission inventory we have talked about this morning. So this model actually can output the emissions based on the LTO cycles. You can output HCR, GTOT, CO, CO2, NOx, SARS, PM2.5, PM10, fuel consumption as well. This model can output all the results for different seasons, summer, winter, and annual average. This model also incorporates the growth for aircraft from 2022 all the way to 2050. But just keep in mind, because the CAI2024 is only accounts the emissions under LTO, so it does not output the total greenhouse gases. So especially for those emissions outside LTO cycles. So, so this model actually consists of four folders of the one Excel file. These 4 folders including correction, input, general inputs, outputs, and users. For the correction, actually is stored the emissions, stored for information for stage number correction. For input folders, actually it consists of the files used for the general emission factors, the flight operations, and also some of the growth. For the users folder, actually have saved some information for customized or airport specific information. For example, you want to update all the information for different free mix, different growth, then you can update, go to the user folders and find out the specific airport and update the information there. So to run the model is very, very straightforward. It's an Excel basis, but it's macro enabled. So open this file and click let's start here, and you will see a secondary GUI. And to continue, you just hit the continue. Then we show up the form deck for you to input. You can specify the aircraft type, agriculture, commercial or non-military commercial, air taxi, general aviation, or military. And this model can also specify you want to output something based on the C-band format. And then you can specify the calendar year, which year you want to run. If you don't specify anything, by default it's set to 2022. For the end year, if you don't specify the end year as well, it will be the same as the start year. Then you also can specify what season you are looking at. Is summer or is winter or it's annual average. So for demonstration purpose, I just select the agriculture. I using the 2022 as an example. I took the annual. Then once you input all the information, you just click continue. Since it's just a small category, you just run instantaneously. For example, click OK. It's instantaneous done. So about if you want to take out for all of the category or also all the C-band outputs, you will take about a couple of minutes. You want to run from 2022 to 2050, it will take 1 hour for 38 years. But in general, it's only a couple of minutes to finish the run, the model run. But as I mentioned before, actually, we have so many information, the mixing height, the growth, the free mix, also emission factors. So this model can give you all the kinds of flexibility. You can update, for example, you have new inputs coming in and you want to test around to see what the inputs are going to impact your outputs. This model give you all the flexibility. You can do that. So, but just keep in mind, before you want to look at the results, just exit the model first, you cancel and exit. Then you go back to the output folders. This is where all the output is stored. So just go to the output folders. Then you will see the top one is the agriculture, such a small one. So you double click it, it will open the outputs for you to look at. And you can do a further filtering, post analysis, or you want to compare the result, you can go from there. So for example, just wait a second. It's open.
It's open.
Okay.
You see it? No.
No.
Give me a second. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. This output that give you all the information you need. For example, from the middle to the right is all the pollutants you need, the THC, NOx, CO, CO2, SOx, PM2.5, fuel consumption, and so on and so forth. For the left-hand side, the middle to the left, it just give you some information regarding the GAI, the geographical information. Then you can play around with it. Also, it can give you some of the aircraft type you can play around. For example, agriculture, jet, or piston, and so on and so forth. You can just play around with it for post-processing purpose. So because the C-band run, it takes more than 5 minutes. So for the sake of the time, we don't want to spend too much time waiting. So I already pre-run some C-band results So go back to the folder, open the one of the CPAN result I have pre-run, then just show you some results. So open the CPAN one. But the reason we put this kind of feature is because we every 1 year or every 2 years, actually, we will request to submit the numbers for each category per CPAN format. So for this kind of feature embedded actually for all the interest parties, you can select the category you want, you hit the CPAN outputs, then this model will give you all the inputs per CPAN format. Then you can submit the result to ARB more easily. So okay, yeah, that's the CPAN format. It's a year, the air district, air basin, county, EIC code, then all the other stuff. Basically just based on the CPAN submittal format. So yeah, and that's pretty much it. With that, I will hand it over to Dr. David Kuras.
Thanks, Kai-Shan. So we have one more slide and then we'll do our second Q&A session. Just one thing to add on the model is that we're also going to include the results in our off-road web platform that hosts the data for all of our other mobile source models. So it should be accessible to a variety of users through a variety of means. We're proposing today to take over responsibility for the emissions inventory, and we will be updating it periodically every few years, perhaps maybe every 5 years, maybe every couple of years, just like we do for the other mobile source categories. However, we have a framework that would allow air districts to still submit their own inventories if there's a compelling reason as to why the local data are more accurate. We just ask that the data are submitted to us along with documentation about a month. I think we said 30 days, so perhaps that'd be by July 2nd by the text on the slide here. But by the beginning of July, if we receive documentation and the results of your own analyses before the annual CEIDARS submittal, and CEIDARS stands for the California Emissions Inventory Data Analysis and Reporting System. If you have any questions on what that means, we're happy to work with you offline and provide further clarification. And so this will be the second of the 2 Q&A sessions. So I will call on the individual who has his hand up now, and we welcome any other questions as well. Michael Huber, if you have a question, go right ahead.
Yeah, no, I have a comment. I think we discussed this earlier, but yeah, we're gonna have to work with us. We're in close coordination with our air districts. We provide them reams of data based on actual source tests and records as far as, you know, how much each different aircraft is used. So you know, you definitely want that accurate data, you know, and you know, so we'll have to talk, you know, as far as process, you know, the most recent study. We don't do them every year, so I mean, obviously you'll have to, you know, just you'll have the best data available, and I think you'll find that as I saw those summary slides you guys put up, and I'm thinking, man, that's way overestimating what's actually going on. But you know, the truth to be told, as far as the data, I think the mixing height stuff that you have, I think definitely needs to be taken into consideration, because you have it, you know, at every airport. And I think ours was at 3,000 feet, if I remember correctly. But we have some SMEs that have actually worked very closely with the air districts, you know, aircraft by aircraft, you know, base by base. So I think we can definitely do the better information. If you're going to assume responsibility, we want to make sure you have the right data. That's all.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I have one question for you, and we'll navigate briefly to slide 40. You made a comment that our emissions are overestimating where you think you're at. So looking at the military category for PM 2.5, ROG, and NOx, and just looking at the red part of the stack.
Yeah, see, that caught my eye. Yeah. And I'm thinking, yeah, we better take a closer look at that, because that was kind of the red flag for me. And we saw earlier versions of this, and we've been working with our air districts very closely on the actual inventories and this seems to have some assumptions built in. So we want to try to ideally just feed the data that we've worked so closely with the air districts, but along with that, the documentation that we submitted to the air districts.
And Michael, do you only work with the Navy data? I mean, is there like for Edwards? I don't think that's Navy.
Yeah,
right?
but I have my Air Force counterparts. They've been working with me. So I'm wearing a DoD hat for purposes of this call. So, what I'll do is that we'll put you in touch with each of the services, and you can get a, coordinated thing. So, I don't want you chasing base by base. We'll work at the regional level. And then we'll pull the bases in, and each of them, have offices that like you had the Air Force one. The Navy has one too. The person, unfortunately, she was on leave today, but she used to actually run those source tests for each engine, so she knows how that's worked. So yes, I'll coordinate that for you, and then you'll definitely, depending on where you are, obviously Air Force bases will be working with the Air Force, but I'll make sure you have the right people.
Thank you. Just one more question for you on the slide that's shown. We fully acknowledge that our activity and fleet mix for the military is subject to high uncertainty, so we'll take you up on the offer to improve that. If you look at the bars that are CAI 2024, so that'd be the first, the third, and the fifth bar, that's our new estimate. But the size of the red bar is decreasing. And so what I thought I heard you say is that the first, the third, and the fifth bar, the lower part of the red segment, is too high. But if you're working with the air districts already, why are they reporting a higher value for each of the three?
Yeah, we're going to have to check on that. That's why it needs to be looked at. And I think the air districts, they're going to, there's high variability in military emissions. That's part of the issue, given obviously, the world events. Sometimes, sometimes it varies. So generally, even the stuff the air district is going to be a high estimate, given kind of the worst case year. So but we try to make sure that we don't go above that as best we can, and we do in certain cases, due to environmental documents, we can't. So that sort of thing. I think we just need to get our SMEs, the ones who put together those studies, working the air districts, and have that conversation, because I think there is too much uncertainty right now.
Very helpful, thank you.
So we'll get there, especially now that if the ARB is assuming responsibility, we want to make sure it is at least as good as what we're doing with the air district. And recognizing that these studies aren't done every year, so you'll probably just use the most recent data we have available.
Got it. Thank you again. Okay, next question or comment, Mark Carreras, Sosvedra.
Hey David, thanks. I have a question about tracking the emissions. And so in CPAM, aircraft emissions are all lumped together. And let's say a commercial aviation. And so that's pretty much all together, which includes taxing and APU emissions. And so thinking of like potential regulations, I mean, it's clear that takeoff and landing and direct aircraft emissions are hard to regulate, but there may be some regulations that may be targeting maybe taxing times or use of APUs. And so I was wondering would it be good to track taxing and APU emissions separately? So in a way that would require a new unique EIC code or something like that. But I think when thinking about like potential measures and analysis of that. I don't know if it would be worth keep tracking these separate emission sources with its own EIC code.
We do in the model separate those, but for EIC wide, we don't separate it. But we could talk to Martin. But yeah, we can definitely separate that. We already do that in the model. If you see the output when you get the model, that you can see that was
Right. Yeah, and then so I mean, when in the past when we report the emissions, we basically report them.
Yeah.
But when we calculate the emissions using AEDT, also we do calculate they separate. So I've just maybe not. I guess then it's not a question to you, but more of the inventory side of the issue.
Yeah, actually, we can show some of the example results from the outputs. There's a non-commercial one. Actually, we do have separate the APU emissions, right?
The annual one that we just,
And outputs. Then not CPAM, there's a non-commercial.
the run that we just did.
No.
The CPAM spreadsheet.
No, my non-military 2022.
Is it in one of your spreadsheets?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't see that. Maybe I missed that. But so in the spreadsheets,
Which directory? Output. The queue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just show them the results.
Give me a second while it loads.
Yeah.
I'm gonna share the screen.
80 megs is gonna take a while.
Yeah, but that's for all the 28 years. So we just for test run and we just got everything.
Give me a second, it's still loading. And while we bring it up, so what I'm hearing is there may be a future control measure that will result in a reduction in aircraft emissions that don't necessarily aren't one-to-one with what's in the CPAM system at this time. And we do have the specificity, and we'll show you in a second within our model to perform those analyses, but the question would be whether we separate them out in CPAM. And there's a precedent for other regulations to have specificity in our inventory modeling that does not get translated to CPAM. But if there's a need and a benefit, that's something that we're open to discussing. No, the non-military should be spreadsheet.
Go to the right.
I see.
Right in the middle. Right in the middle.
Right. I see.
Yeah, we do have provided APO NOx, APO CO, CO2, all this. Yeah.
And is taxing too separated or?
taxi.
No taxi, just separate the APO.
Okay.
If you want,
Yeah, if you want to take out the APO, then the rest of stuff in the column AL, that will be just for the from the event engine.
I see.
Maybe just go down to show some aircraft and some numbers. Yeah, because that really depends. All this output is all based on the specific engine and frame combination. So some of them might have numbers, some of them don't.
and if you want only the taxi portion, we would have to do it off model because you would have to get a percentage of what is taxi stuff.
Right. Okay.
We put in the whole.
Yeah, I think that's one of the components one we got to see. If you want this model to output what kind of feature you want, so maybe we can try to.
Yeah, I think it's a great suggestion. I think we should look at it. So. Yeah.
I mean, like there's I'm thinking of maybe potential future measures that we.
Right.
There's some airports that already have some there's a zero emissions taxing at TUG, and so they may be able to reduce taxing emissions. There's also measures where there's like airplanes basically hook up so they don't need the auxiliary power unit. And so having the ability to look at the CPAM just for like designing of measures is very practical. It will be very practical, but I understand that you say that maybe in other it happens with other categories as well, so that's fine.
Really good suggestion, though, Mark. I think we're going to look into that.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? I don't see any more hands raised at this time. I'm still not seeing anything, so we have one more slide to go over. So want to go.
There's something on chat, Dave Coffin. He says he can't raise his hand. Please see. So, and I'll just read it, that Dave Coffin, he's asking, not if CPAM for military data can be broken by military installation. This would allow CARB to give MyCuber such data that may potentially allow for more effective checking of individual military airfields data sets.
Yeah, we do have
that.
yeah, we do have a separate output just for military, but we for operation, I mean for demonstration purpose, we don't show them, but we do have separate file for military, agriculture, and all the non-military one, including commercial, air taxi, and general aviations. We do have separate files outputs for them.
But is the military broken out by base? So
yes,
okay, it is.
We do have it by base, but I'm not sure when we report it, it would be reported by county air basing.
I think that's the question is.
Yeah, but we could probably put in another column and separate it by base.
Okay. And I apologize to Becky. I know you also had a question in the chat box. So Becky Westerfeld is asking, is San Diego Military, North Islands, and International Airports, both located within dense populated residential neighborhoods, being monitored? Current Japanese testing of military jets on San Diego North Island, which is along city downtown bayfront, is unusual, but is an impact. So basically, are they being monitored?
It's the air quality impacts.
Well, it says, well, the initial question was, is San Diego Military, North Island, and International Airport both located within densely populated residential neighborhoods being monitored?
We do incorporate those data into our model, yes. I don't know about monitoring, like air monitoring. That's a different
That
question.
may be the question. So there are air monitors in the San Diego area that would capture some of the impacts of these facilities, but I don't believe that there's fence line monitoring being done specifically to assess the impact of these facilities. But if we have any representatives from San Diego APCD on the call who might want to speak to this question, that would be great. No, okay.
And actually, one more thing from Sam Wang for SCAQMD. Does the new model include emissions from military activities, as an example, rockets, missiles, etc., not just aircraft? And other special emissions, such as SpaceX launches and exercises?
No, we only took aircraft, military aircrafts, helicopters, not rockets.
Okay.
Good suggestion, though. I think maybe we should look at that.
Thank you, Sam, for your question on chat. That's it.
Okay.
Hold on, sorry. Okay, Becky said thank you. That just popped up.
Well, seeing no other hands raised, why don't we go to the final slide?
Okay.
So after the workshop today, we're going to be holding an unofficial comment period. And I use the word unofficial because it's not going to be a docket and it's not for a formal regulatory proposal. We're requesting your feedback if you have anything further beyond what was provided at the workshop today. We have documentation with several appendices listing the inputs and the outputs to the model in more detail than what we covered in the slides. We asked for your comments by Wednesday, November 27th. After that time, we'll take the feedback that we've received and make revisions and work toward finalizing the model by the end of this calendar year. We ask that you send your comments to David Cho at arb.ca.gov. He's not here with us today. And also copy aircraft@arb.ca.gov. We look forward to working with you as we finalize this model release and then as we go forward to update the model periodically over the coming years. That ends the material that we have presented. We'll look one more time at the chat, and also if any hands are raised, if there's any further questions. And on the slide here are the team that worked on the inventory over the last few years and their contact information should you have any further questions.
There are just posted on the chat. First question from Dave Coffin. For ABL, will data be by airport and will it be provided? For ABL, will data by airport be provided?
I'm not sure what ABL stands for.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the data is provided by airport.
Okay.
What's
And
ABL?
I think it's a
Dave,
small general
if you're still on chat, can you explain? Okay, there. Atmospheric boundary layer.
Oh,
Thank you, Dave.
verified.
So in the appendices that are posted on our website, there is the mixing height that was determined for each of the airports in California. If you would like further detail on the monthly or diurnal distribution, then we can provide that to you. Send us an email and we can find a way to get you more data and we can get into it with you.
Okay. And then a couple more questions. First one is from Matthew Sigleski, and I apologize if I pronounce your last name incorrectly, Matthew. Will the model be able to account for the projected growth of electrical-based aircraft like air taxis and drone AG sprayers, agricultural sprayers?
That's a great question. And we are planning for a transition of some of the aviation fuel to be using a zero emission fuel, whether that be electricity or hydrogen in the future. This time around, given that there is little to no zero emission aviation activity happening, we don't have plans to. However, we are beginning in all of our mobile source models to add additional outputs and further characterize not the fuel consumed in terms of gallons, but the energy consumed or the weight of hydrogen consumed for each of the sectors. So that is on the horizon for an update, likely in the next time around. So that would not be something we're planning for the end of 2024.
Okay. What else is there to Matthew? Allison, Per asked, how often will this model be updated going forward?
That's a great question. We typically update our mobile source models every 3 to 5 years. It may be sooner if there's a need to update it sooner and to provide more differentiation by operation stage or by technology. It may be longer than that if there's not any major changes that we need to support. But targeting every 3 to 5 years going forward for the statewide aircraft inventory model.
Thank you for that. And then going back to Dave Coffin, Got a couple of questions. One is what would you call what you call mixing layer height? That's his question. What would you call?
That's the same.
Oh, it is, okay. I guess the second follow-up question is, will this be, or where is this on the ARB website? Slide number 2, there is a link over here. Pardon me.
I think he's asking where the model is.
Oh, model file, excuse me. Where, since the model isn't released yet. Sorry.
The model files themselves are not posted. We do plan on posting them after we finalize it. Although if you have an interest in seeing the model files that we just demonstrated, we'd be happy to provide you a copy directly. So please get in touch with us so we can work something out.
Thank you, David. I don't see any other questions on the chat box. No raised hands, so pardon me.
It does look like we just got a raised hand from Paul Costa.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, and good morning. Appreciate the presentation and the time you went to go over it. Paul Costa with the Boeing Company. Just wanted to make a general comment right now. There's a lot of information we need to go through. I think you probably are aware, hopefully you're aware of the amount of work that the company has done working with our airline customers and engine manufacturers related to assessing and looking at ways to reduce air emissions from our products. We've got programs out there already. Our eco demonstrator has done quite a lot of work in this area, not only just on areas for NOx reduction emissions on it, but of course for addressing global climate change. So I think at this point in time, there's a few of us that from the company that are on the phone listening in. So we'll circle back in, take a look, work with our airline customers, and make sure that we are be able to start interacting with CARB to provide additional information, the information we have to make sure that your model is as accurate as it can be with the given data that's out there. So I just want to make sure that you're aware that we've been listening and we'll be going back and be reaching out to CARB on that. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Paul. We really appreciate your engagement and working with your airline customers to look into the model and provide feedback to us. It came up a bit ago with the forecast of where we got our fleet mix and where are we projecting changes are going to happen. And for some of the regions, like in the South Coast Air Quality Management District and in San Diego, we do provide a future fleet mix forecast. And we didn't see substantial changes from the main engines of the aircraft in terms of NOx or PM. But we do recognize that there's cleaner and higher emitting aircraft models and engine combinations, but there was just enough diversity that as the portfolio changed, the changing of the fleet mix didn't have a substantial change. But if you're seeing something different or are aware of plans to transition to certain airframes or certain engine models, we would really appreciate getting that information and we can include it in this model release.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of our customers I was on earlier on the they're still on, but yeah, and that's what obviously it involves a lot of close coordination with our customers in terms of fleet models, designs, where those the model types are coming into and frequency. So more to there. I'm definitely not the expert in this area in terms of this, but we will sure coordinate and get to the right people. So thanks.
Thank you, Paul. So we'll take one last look for hands or any questions in the chat. And if there's no further questions, you have our contact information. We're asking for feedback by Wednesday, November 27th. That'll be the day before Thanksgiving, and we will work toward a model release by the end of this year. Thank you very much for your engagement, your attention today, and we look forward to further collaboration. Bye, everyone.